Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Let's talk about crazy Joe Biden. Let's see, a couple stories from Breitbart here. Joe Biden attempted to dismiss concerns about his apparent cognitive decline, but then seemingly put it on full display. During a virtual interview with the National Association of Black Journalists, Biden was asked if he's taken a cognitive assessment, and he bristled. No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying you, before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not. What do you think, huh? Are you a junkie? No, I'm not making this up. No, I'm not making this up. Joe Biden got I suppose, a tough question from a black journalist and proceeded to ask him if he's taking cocaine or if he is a junkie. This was to Errol Barnett. He attempted to laugh off another question about his mental state. Quote, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about, unquote. Identifying animals is one portion of the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which former White House physician Dr. Ronnie Jackson said President Trump aced. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but I'm so forward-looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates, apparently intending to say looking forward. I'm very willing to let the American people judge my physical as well as my mental fitness, he struggled to say. Jackson has voiced concerns that Biden may be declining mentally. I'm not comfortable with him being my president, Jackson told the Kyle Olson Show in July. I think he's got some cognitive issues. As a concerned American who also happens to be a physician, I'm just going to say it's concerning to me that he sometimes is not able to complete a sentence, not really know where he's at or what he's doing, and we've seen that countless times now. Jackson predicted Biden would not attempt debates with Trump, but Jill Biden told Fox News on Tuesday he will be there. Why Dr. Jill Biden has to answer for Joe is an interesting question. And again, this is just too funny that, of course, this is reminiscent, as Breitbart points out, of what was this, a month ago or so, Joe Biden said, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. He said this to Charlemagne the God. I don't know, maybe Joe thinks of black people, and besides his good friend, Barack Obama, he thinks of corn pop. Of course, the Democrats and their allies in the media are pushing the line that it is actually Donald Trump who is suffering from cognitive decline. Trump gives many press conferences and gets many tough questions. Joe Biden is a nasty man. This has been evident for decades. He seems to worry about his intelligence, that people don't think that he's smart enough, which explains why he's always boasting about his IQ, which doesn't seem to be all that high, and lying about how well he did in university, how well he did in law school, whether he got full scholarships, that sort of thing, calling people fat and the like, lashing out. Now, keep in mind, this is how Joe Biden is acting under almost no pressure, because he's in a Democratic convention, a convention in the way that we have known them in the past. This is from the New York Times today, citing coronavirus concerns. Democrats, again, I don't know whether this has really sunk in with the American people. It certainly hasn't sunk in with the media. Are Americans going to rush out to vote for a person who is so afraid of the coronavirus that he has to be isolated at all times, that, I don't know, gets it and he's dead within a week is that really something, an attribute that's going to get people all psyched to rush out and vote for Joe Biden, or to, of course, to fill out, or get someone else to fill out your ballot for you, because apparently that's illegal, and to close the envelope and post it. Democrats are once again dialing back plans for their party convention, announcing on Wednesday that the event will effectively be entirely virtual. On the advice of health officials working for the party, no national Democratic officials, not even Joe Biden, will travel from out of state to participate in events. Biden will accept the party's presidential nomination from his home state of Delaware. Democrats argued that the decision showed that they were taking the pandemic more seriously than President Trump was. For months, Biden has criticized Trump as irresponsible for ignoring the science around the virus. Democratic allies say that in order to underscore the contrast between the two men, it is important for Biden to serve as a role model who adheres firmly to the public health guidelines Trump has often flouted. From the very beginning of this pandemic, we put the health and safety of the American people first, said Tom Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee. That's the kind of steady and responsible leadership America deserves, and that's the leadership Joe Biden will bring to the White House. Wisconsin officials are still expected to give speeches at the convention center in downtown Milwaukee Convention Center, but leading Democrats, including former President Obama, Michelle Obama, and Joe Biden, plan to deliver their addresses from elsewhere. So this is going to be an entirely Zoom campaign. Once again, if catching the coronavirus is such a worry for Joe Biden, is he ever going to meet with people outside of his wife ever again? Health officials working for the convention advised against having anyone travel to Milwaukee, citing fear of bringing the virus from other parts of the country. Milwaukee, as I learned from Red Letter Media, they're locked down, they're not locked down, they're locked down, they're not locked down. I don't know what phase they're in now, but it looks cowardly. It looks cowardly more than anything else. And what kind of campaign are the Democrats planning to run? Well, there's a story from Politico, which is rather unusual. Donald Trump's campaign said it knocked on over $1 million in the past week alone. Joe Biden's campaign says it knocked on zero. The Republican and Democratic parties, from the presidential candidates on down, are taking polar opposite approaches to door-to-door canvassing this fall. The competing bets on the value of face-to-face campaigning during a pandemic has no modern precedent, making it a potential wild card in November, especially in close races. Biden and the DNC aren't sending volunteers or staffers to talk with voters at home and don't anticipate doing anything more than dropping off literature unless the crisis abates. And of course, it is very much in their interest to have the crisis abate, well, never. The campaign and the DNC think they can compensate for the lack of in-person canvassing with phone calls, texts, new forms of digital organizing, and virtual meetups with voters. How many squares can you get on your Zoom screen? Is that how this is going to service? But our response rate, phone calls and text, in contrast, started deploying mask-wearing field staffers and volunteers to the streets in June. The GOP quickly ramped up and now claims more than $1 million a week, despite COVID-19 surges across the country, including in swing states like Arizona. So, I quoted from that New York Times story. I want to talk, let's talk about the debate, because the more I hear, the more it seems likely that there's not going to be a debate. Again, not in the sense that we've known debates for decades, that Joe Biden is going to be hiding in his basement, appearing on a Zoom screen, and he's not going to share a stage with Donald Trump, once again, because Joe Biden can't go anywhere because he would get sick and die directly. The president who has to be cocooned, maybe he could wear goggles and a face shield, or maybe a hazmat suit. Would that protect Joe Biden sufficiently? Let's go to the chat, see whether there's any complaints about the broadcast quality. Video quality as good as Biden's cognition, says Chogokin 666. Well, that is not a good start. The show is gone, says Metal Mike. An error message. Not an error message from my point of view. Heck, McNeck says if Uncle Joe wins the election, we'll likely see the invocation of the 25th Amendment before the man ever takes office. De says, I now believe Joe knows he will get a bad run and he wants to make it a record. All-time lows are coming for the Democrats. Joe Biden's worry, it says Metal Mike, is people hearing him speak in public. It's not just that. If you've seen any of his recent videos, you're getting a lot of this. These wild-eyed stares. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Where did everybody go? Where's Corn Pop? That sort of thing. He looks demented. And again, the fact that he's had all this plastic surgery done to his face, leading to the famous Joker effect, where it looks like, whenever he smiles, it looks like his skin is about to snap. This does not help the cognition issue. Walrus Libertarian says the mail-in ballots will be a massive mess. They know they can't get a decisive win with Biden. Well, the longer it is after the polls close before a victor is declared and people accept there's a victor, the more likelihood, one, that the election was fixed, and two, that people are not going to accept the results of the election. I mean, I've heard people write blithely for some weeks now, oh, it might be days, it might be a week, it might be more than a week before we know the result of the election. And of course, that happened in 2000 between Bush and Gore. But there were no widespread claims of the election being stolen at that point. And there are going to be claims of the election being stolen. I've even heard suggestions being made that perhaps foreign leaders, beginning with China, do not recognize Trump as president if he wins the election, or officially wins the election. Of course, we've never seen that in election year politics of the United States, but we may well see it now, because this is the year where everything crazy happens. Everything crazy happens and is expected to happen. Again, oh yeah, we're just going to have complete uncertainty after the election for week 2, 3 weeks. And how do you think that that is going to work out? Meanwhile, an election of sorts is being fought on America's streets. Michael Tracy has a piece in Unheard, How White Radicals Hijacked Portland's Protests. Overwhelmingly white anarchist activists who populate the ongoing protests in Portland should not be underestimated for their strategic savvy. In seizing the mantle of Black Lives Matter, they discovered a workaround to arrogate moral cover for whatever insurrectionary upheaval they would have been ideologically committed to fomenting anyway. The left liberal political and media class is deeply invested in preserving the untouchable sanctity of BLM. So by fusing themselves in the public mind with this ambiguously defined protest movement, or even putting themselves at the vanguard, the anarchist whites insulate themselves from the type of scrutiny that might ordinarily be prompted by activists whose ultimate goal is the overthrow of the state, and who are happy to engage in what they call a diversity of tactics, up to and including violence, to achieve this. It makes for a bizarre dynamic, as Democratic Party pundits and politicians routinely described avowed insurrectionists as nothing more than benign, peaceful protesters. And since the protests came to be arrayed against the federal forces dispatched to Portland by Donald Trump, more conventional elements of the left liberal resistance have made common cause with these revolutionary anarchists who regard the very essence of the U.S. political system, not just Trump, as innately fascist and white supremacist. On a recent evening, for instance, an older white couple in a pair of matching Resistance branded t-shirts could be spotted in attendance among the radical activists, as well as a man sporting the slogan, "Ridin' with Biden." To characterize what's gone on in Portland as a traditional protest is a misnomer, however. Pay a visit to the area around the federal courthouse in downtown after midnight, and you were greeted by brigades of black-clad Antifa foot soldiers geared up in full body armor, complete with industrial-grade gas masks, shields, and even customized radio systems. Being overwhelmingly white, they are strategic about public presentation. The speakers appointed to address the nightly rallies are almost exclusively black, as amplifying black voices to whom whites must dutifully listen is a central tenet of the summer 2020 protest ethos. If there's any foundational idea operative in Portland, it's to keep a frenetic confrontation with the state going for as long as possible, so as to maximize the chances that an incendiary incident might occur and catalyze a larger insurrectionary uproar, similar to the killing of George Floyd in May, which sparked nationwide riots. One fateful tear gas canister fired in the temple of a protester could reverberate rapidly across the country. Portland solidarity actions have already sprouted up as far away as Richmond, Virginia. This is by design. A former occupant of the so-called Chaz, the former anarchist commune that took over a portion of Seattle in June, told me a number of people who previously set up shop there had headed south to Portland. As I milled around one night, live streaming on my phone, a protester wielding a heavy-duty shield emblazoned with the anarchist A symbol demanded that I cease recording. When I declined to obey this command, I was confronted by several additional protesters, all white, of course, one of whom snatched the phone out of my hands. It was only returned after I agreed to recite the phrase "Black Lives Matter" with sufficient vigor. This friendly fellow subsequently threatened to fucking stomp me out and then ejected me from the protest zone, forcing me to run, not walk, away as another associate hurled a projectile at me, certainly not behavior I've encountered at any other protest. The pandemic is far from the minds of participants, in contrast with most working-class Americans. One night, I tried to put a question to Portland's mayor, Ted Wheeler, about the advisability of mass protest gatherings as COVID cases spike in the state of Oregon. Wheeler had ventured out in a show of support for the protesters and was even permitted to address the rally, despite being widely loathed. "Fuck you, Ted Wheeler," his detractors shouted, unimpressed by his pleading. Still determined to demonstrate his solidarity, however, he subjected himself to a choreographed tear gassing from federal forces. A New York Times reporter was right next to him at the time, surely by sheer coincidence. "The most important thing right now is the Black Lives Matter movement," Wheeler replied to me, at which protesters in the vicinity became enraged, accusing me of engaging in white supremacy and silencing blacks for posing a question they, the whites, deemed inappropriate to an elected official. "That is a premise that doesn't concern this movement at all," one protester said of the pandemic, as others demanded that I get the fuck out of here. Again, this cognitive dissonance, the Schrödinger's cat way of thinking of the leftists and of the Democratic Party and of the media now. On the one hand, Trump is risking lives by not forcing everyone to wear masks. I don't know how that would even be possible. People going out in public are risking everyone's lives. Mario Cuomo whining about no one having the right to infect me. But on the other hand, mass protests, well, yeah, absolutely a great idea. Absolutely a great idea. Now, as far as this affects the Democrats, people, I'm told, are bullied into lying to pollsters because they don't want to give the wrong answer. They don't want to be seen as giving the wrong answer. But the thing about voting is that it is an anonymous ballot. And I would have to think there are many, many, many Americans who are already fed up with Black Lives Matter, because this has been revealed in very short order to be a black supremacist movement, that white people are told to shut up, that only black voices matter. But of course, in places like Portland, which is only 6% black, it's going to be white people that are going to be enforcing these rules, that white people are racist. They're all racist. There's nothing they can do about it. They all benefit from something called white privilege and white supremacy. In other words, we hate you. We want you gone, but you must support us politically. Well, white people are under no obligation to do so. Michael Tracy continues, Wheeler's fallacy is imagining that any incrementalist policy reforms will satisfy the ideological core of these protesters, whose goal is abolition of the country's entire criminal justice apparatus, in addition to general insurrection. But as expected, even getting tear gassed wasn't enough to placate Wheeler's critics. The following day, Joanne Hardesty, a Portland city commissioner, dismissed Wheeler as a, quote, privileged white man, unquote. Having received a sizable helping of tear gas myself, I can confirm that it was highly unpleasant. The source of the animosity toward Wheeler is the conduct of the municipal Portland police, which a number of residents and even officers find genuinely baffling. We are probably one of the most progressive law enforcement agencies I've ever had the opportunity to be around. One veteran Portland Police Bureau officer told me as he monitored the protest action from afar one night, semi-hidden in an unmarked vehicle parked on a side street with the massive booms of the mortar-style fireworks being fired at the federal courthouse crackling in the background. And it's just sad to me that we're getting shoved back into the stigma of these jackbooted thugs again. All the outreach we've done, oh dear, all the gang outreach we've been part of, it's all been taken away from us. Indeed, take a look at the official Portland Police Twitter account and you will find a banner image of an officer happily wearing an LGBT pride flag-colored face mask. A left-wing political activist in Portland who asked to remain nameless for fear of retribution attested to having a friend in the Bureau who was a black lesbian woman with several children. She's one of the most thoughtful, intelligent people that I know, the activist said, who went into becoming a police officer because she wanted to see more people like her on the force in her community. Well, yeah. This is what it comes down to. It's never a good idea to back your enemies into a corner, and this is precisely what Black Lives Matter, and the media, and the Democratic Party have done. All black, all the time, whites are wicked, and white people who still constitute a majority in the United States might well ask, what do we get out of this? Now, we know what the elite gets out of it. They get jobs, and they get status. But everyone else, particularly those people whose jobs were determined to be non-essential, it seems that they are being beaten into the dust, and that nothing less than the complete overthrow of America will be sufficient for them. Now, I'm sure most people know or have a sense that the murder rate is increasing rapidly in the United States, and places like Chicago and New York City, amongst other American metropolises, are descending into anarchy. Is that what you want in your hometown? Do you want to cast your vote for Joe Biden and the entire Democratic ticket only to be told it doesn't matter, you're still a racist, and there's nothing that you can do about it? I very much doubt it, actually. I very much doubt it. There's a very long essay in the tablet by Zach Goldberg called How the Media Led the Great Racial Awakening. Years before Trump's election, the media dramatically increased coverage of racism and embraced new theories of racial consciousness that set the stage for the latest unrest. I have to ask this question again. You hear Joe Biden carrying on about systemic inequity, systemic racism, et cetera, You hear Barack Obama saying it. What about those years when Barack Obama was president and the Democrats controlled Congress? Why didn't they do anything systemically about this alleged crisis then? Because the claims of police brutality are certainly not new. The claims of iniquitous treatment of black people is certainly not new. This goes back for decades and decades. They had the power. They didn't do anything about it. And it suggests cynicism. That's all it suggests on their part. Oh, now we have to do something about it. Why? Because Donald Trump is president? You had the power, you had the opportunity. Why didn't you move? Why didn't you restructure or reimagine the police back then? Why didn't you pass DOJ guidelines making it, I don't know, impossible for more black people proportionately to be arrested than white people? They could have done it, yet they didn't. Goldberg begins in the wake of the protest riots and general upheaval sparked by the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The United States is experiencing a racial, wait for it, reckoning. The response from America's elite liberal institutions suggests that many have embraced the ideology of the protesters. Here, for instance, is a sampling of the title of opinion pieces and news stories published over the past month by the country's two most influential newspapers, the Washington Post and the New York Times. When black people are in pain, white people just join book clubs. Boo, book clubs. Black activists wonder, is protesting just trendy for white people? See, it's never enough. It's never enough. Oh, we're allies. We went onto the street. We formed a barrier around you. We got tear gassed, but oh no, apparently we're doing this just because it's trendy. To white people who want to be one of the good ones, America's enduring caste system, eh? And we have all these people from India coming to North America and lecturing us about our caste system, which is pretty amusing, considering that there are tens of millions of people in India who are literally untouchable. Our founding ideals promise liberty and equality for all. Our reality is an enduring racial hierarchy that has persisted for centuries. Of course, the planted axiom here is that, I don't know, there's nothing that black people can do about it. Maybe they could, study harder, stay away from criminals, don't use drugs as much, maybe cooperate with the police when people get murdered in your city, in your neighborhood, on your block, in your building. No, apparently none of those avenues are available. The last entry on the list, a lengthy feature on America's caste system in the New York Times Magazine, explicitly compares the United States to Nazi Germany. Countless articles have been published in recent weeks, often under the guise of straight news reporting, in which journalists take for granted the legitimacy of novel theories about race and identity. Such articles illustrate a prevailing new political morality on questions of race and justice that has taken power at the Times and Post, a worldview sometimes abbreviated as wokeness that combines the sensibilities of highly educated and hyper-liberal white professionals with elements of black nationalism and academic critical race theory. But the media's embrace of wokeness did not begin in response to the death of George Floyd. This racial ideology first began to take hold at leading liberal media institutions years before the arrival of Donald Trump, and in fact, heavily influenced the journalistic response to the protest movements of recent years and their critique of American society. In other words, the chickens have come home to roost. And this is an indictment of the so-called conservative movement, because they stood by and did nothing as the media decided to shut out all contrary voices and to terrify media outlets that no, let's not report on the truth anymore. Let's join in when someone gets sacked for saying that black riots in 1968 helped the Nixon campaign's election. No, we can't even report the facts anymore. Starting well before Donald Trump's rise to power, while President Obama was still in office, terms like microaggression and white privilege were picked up by liberal journalists. These terms went from being obscure fragments of academic jargon to commonplace journalistic language in only a few years, a process that I document here in detail. During this same period, while exotic new phrases were entering the discourse, universally recognizable words like racism were being radically redefined. Along with the new language came ideas and beliefs animating a new moral political framework to apply to American public life and society. Well, This is another question of whom. Oh, we're going to judge everybody on racism. Oh, who gets to define what racism is? Oh, our enemies do. Well, I suppose, the conservatives, the moderates could have said, no, we're not going to agree to this, not for a second. We are not going to play a rigged game where you are always right and we are always wrong, that we are always guilty. And let's see, Goldberg has a racist racism graph here and showing it beginning from a relative low point in about 2011, simply exploding at the Washington Post, which appears to be the worst offender, increasing by about 40% at the New York Times, and smaller but still significant increases from the Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times. In 2011, the terms racism accounted for 0.0027 and 0.0029 of all words in the New York Times and the Washington Post, respectively. What we see over the past decade is a continual dramatic increase in usages of racism and its variations. Moreover, the graph shows that this increase occurred a half-decade before the arrival of Donald Trump. By 2019, it would constitute 0.02% and just under 0.03% of all words published in the Times and Post, an increase of over 700% and just under 1,000%, respectively, from 2001. In 2016, the New York Times published a news article detailing efforts on college campuses to train new students on how to avoid and deal with microaggressions, one of the novel categories of racism popularized over the past decade that has contributed to the perception of pervasive racial injustice. As an example of a microaggression, the article cites the following comment: everyone can succeed in this society if they work hard enough. I suppose that's a worthy goal. It's obviously not true, but the acceptance of the word microaggression is a huge victory for the left because, quite frankly, the world is a series of microaggressions to almost everyone alive, to almost everyone who has ever lived. People are going to be, they're going to be slighted, they're going to be ignored, they're going to be patronized, etc., etc., etc. There's no getting around this. But instead of attempting to teach young people how to toughen their hides, we have encouraged them to make themselves weaker and to congratulate themselves for their weakness and to seek applause, to seek adulation for advertising their weakness to the whole of the world. In the absence of legal discrimination in the post-affirmative action era, in the light of the immense absolute improvements in the quality of life of the average black person over the past half-century, concepts like microaggression and implicit bias have been critical in cultivating the perception amplified by the media that America still practices a form of insidious racial apartheid. This occurs by the process of concept creep, a stretching of the terminological and normative boundaries of what constitutes racism and racist behavior, the racialization of things that weren't previously viewed or understood through the, wait for it, lens of race. The upshot is that the more aspects of social life the media racializes, the more racism there is for the media to report on. Of course, minorities are always going to be in a particular position in any society unless they're one of those minorities that runs the country. That minorities are always likely to feel as if they're being treated differently, that they are not being treated fairly, that they are always being noticed for being a minority in the way that members of the majority are not. There's no getting around this. Again, there's no getting around it, and I'm afraid I see this as a example of the failure of colorblind, the idea of, oh, we can have a colorblind society. I'm afraid that's not possible. It's never possible. People always notice these things, and people have assumptions, prejudices, if you will. I suppose it's a question of how people or how society generally rises above this, how there is no overt prejudice against people, because covert forms of prejudice are always going to be there. And of course, this is not something that can be proved. Someone, so much of this fuss about the Ellen show seems to derive from the fact that one black woman there, perhaps more than one, claimed to be the victim of microaggressions. Now, I can well imagine what these microaggressions are. If you look at this woman, it's a microaggression. If you don't look at her, it's a microaggression. If you smile at her, it's a microaggression. If you don't smile at her, it's a microaggression. If you speak to her, it's a microaggression. If you don't speak to her, it's a microaggression. This is the slave mentality that Nietzsche talked about. And to people who are cursed with this, it's something that cannot be eradicated. Now, of course, it's almost actionable. You know, someone is being prejudiced against me. Can you prove it? I don't need to prove it because it's systemic in society. Steve Saylor reports, Chicago area leaders call for Illinois to abolish history classes. This would seem to be evidence for my hypothesis that in the all of the times when statues were pulled down, this was not so much that people were enraged that there were statues commemorating such and such an old white man, because as we know, the statue of Frederick Douglass was pulled down, but that it's the past. And the past is sinister and wicked and must be eliminated. Let's see, State Representative LaShawn K. Ford said current history teachings overlook the contributions of women and minorities. Saylor comments, the people who say that history textbooks overlook the contributions of women and minorities are people who can't remember what was in their history textbooks. Heck, I can remember Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad was in my grade school reading textbook in the 1960s. When I was so young, I assumed it was a real Underground Railroad and kept waiting for the part where the slaves dig a tunnel to Canada. Let's see. Representative Ford today in Evanston to call for abolition of history classes in Illinois schools, and that school districts should immediately remove history curriculum and books that unfairly communicate history until a suitable alternative is developed. The state representative is sponsoring a bill that will require elementary schools to teach students about the civil rights movement. Again, well, Saylor points out the obvious. What on earth are they talking about? Let's just pretend that the last 60 years have not happened. Harriet Tubman is a rather curious figure in American history because most of her achievements are based on statements that she made herself. There's not very much about her life that we know for certain. Rosa Parks got on a bus and sat in the wrong place. I suppose it was a brave act at the time. Does this justify putting her in the forefront of American heroes? Well, if all white people are disqualified from being American heroes by virtue of being white, then I guess you're left with people like Rosa Parks. John Lewis died recently. I thought it was funny. Trump was asked about him, and Trump had little to say about him, saying he didn't know him very well. He didn't come to the inauguration. Trump is communicating something subtle but important here. You're expecting me to grovel about what a giant of a man John Lewis was and how the promise of whatever he did on that bridge back in Selma or Birmingham in the 1960s has not yet come to pass. But Trump refused to do it, and good for him. Okay. Since we're on the subject of idiocy, Toby Young in Lockdown Skeptics, he reports about a rather shocking survey from Mumsnet. I don't know. From what I know about Mumsnet, the people who contribute there are likely to be Karens. They're likely to be terrified of anything which could possibly constitute or be deemed to constitute a threat to their children. But in any event, Mumsnet published a survey today asking parents how satisfied they were with the arrangements schools put in place to readmit some children in July. It contains this horrifying finding. Among parents whose child was offered the opportunity to spend some time in school before the summer holidays, 23% said they did not take up the offer. The top reasons included concern that their child might transmit COVID-19 to family members, 48%, confidence that homeschooling was working well, 39%, concern that their child might catch COVID-19 and become ill, 38%, and worries about the local or regional infection rate, 32%. I don't suppose I need to remind readers that there isn't a single documented case anywhere in the world of a child passing on the virus to an adult, and the risk of a child under the age of 15 dying from COVID-19 is lower than the risk of them dying from a lightning strike. Of course, the people who are likely to indicate in this fear of this kind, they are well capable of saying, are we doing enough to protect people, especially children, from lightning strikes? Can lightning strikes be predicted? Should everyone be part of a network which alerts them on their smartphone when there is lightning in the vicinity? Or are there classes, workshops about lightning, living with lightning, avoiding lightning, how you can best live a lightning-free life? I say this as a joke, but I know that a great many of these women would think this was an excellent idea, particularly if, say, opinion polls indicated that, I don't know, a majority of Americans were in favor of lightning awareness. And he reports, oh yes, try being a dentist. Today I took a call from my dentist, this is from a reader, about an imminent checkup and filling. Previously, I've never had any qualms about going to the dentist, but I now confess to twinges of apprehension. It's not hyperbole to say that I felt as though I was being prepared to face an Ebola outbreak or a nuclear leak. First of all, I was given an over-the-phone medical. The whole emphasis was on danger, the risk I posed to them and the risk they posed to me, and what was being done to mitigate it. I started off getting irritated, but by the end of the call, I was grinning. Sometimes that's all you can do. In summary, I cannot enter the surgery as it will be locked. I must wait in my car or stay a minimum of 2 meters from the front entrance until called on my mobile. A minimum of 2 meters when I'm on the street? This is beyond ridicule, so I won't even try. On entering, I will immediately have my hands sanitized and can bring neither people nor possessions in with me. I will then have a face nappy applied, something which I have successfully avoided until now. I explained that I cannot wear one and have a lanyard. They were clear, no mask, no entry. I was advised that my mask would be removed for the actual checkup and work, which was reassuring. Finally, I was told to use the loo before I left home, as the toilet is for staff only. Normally, this wouldn't be an issue, but it's a 1 3/4 hour drive for me, time for the treatment, and a 1 3/4 hour drive home. I did say this may be difficult if I was caught short. I was advised that if I absolutely needed it, then they would comply. But the rules state that if I do, then no one else may use it for a period of 1 hour, and then it would need to be deep cleaned. Yes. Yes, let's see. The Prime Minister of Britain, Boris Johnson, has given a broad range of powers to local authorities to contain outbreaks, including getting a magistrate to order the demolition of your home. How about that? The document published by the Department of Health and Social Care advises councils that under the Public Health Control of Disease Act 1984, they can apply to a magistrate to impose restrictions or requirements to close contaminated premises, close public spaces in the area of a local authority, detain a conveyance or movable structure, disinfect or decontaminate premises, or order that a building, conveyance, or structure be destroyed. David Nabarro, Special Envoy to the WHO on COVID-19, says, I don't think that British society can tolerate more lockdowns and economic deprivation. I think it's wrong for children not to be going to school. What are we able to do as a society in order to push this virus back and get on with our lives? And I believe there is, oh, yes, this is interesting. A report was published last month by the Health Information and Quality Authority, a statutory government-funded agency in Ireland which monitors the safety and quality of the healthcare and social care systems, drawing attention to possible errors in the COVID death count in the Emerald Isle. The officially reported COVID-19 deaths may overestimate the true burden of excess mortality specifically caused by COVID-19. This may be due to the likely inclusion within official COVID-19 figures of people who were known to be infected with SARS-CoV-2 at the time of death, who were at or close to end of life independently of COVID-19, or whose death may have been predominantly due to other factors. And someone writes from Melbourne, where they have gone completely insane. A beautiful winter Sunday afternoon was ruined by our hapless, or is that hopeless, state premier announcing in his gravest tones that lockdown 2.0 and mandatory face nappies just aren't doing the trick. We are all being very naughty and not doing as we're told, and so the state of emergency is being upgraded to a state of disaster. This involves a near total shutdown of non-essential businesses, an 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, no travel further than 5 kilometers from your home, and you're only allowed out for 1 hour of exercise per day. Schools closed, weddings banned, and numbers at funerals are limited. Welcome to lockdown 3.0. Within minutes of the announcement, queues were forming outside supermarkets, and by the end of the days, the shelves had been stripped of fruit, veg, and fresh meat by panic-buying locusts. They obviously stopped listening to Kim Jong-dan's doom-mongering before he got to the bit where he said supermarkets would remain open. Well, the numbers in Australia are low. They've always been low. It is an island far away from everywhere else. And it doesn't seem to make any difference. They've got more cases. And what does a case mean? Well, it means you've been infected, or we believe you've been infected. And what if you're not sick? What if most of these people are not sick? What if most of the people under the age of 70 or even 80 are not sick? Well, it doesn't matter. Alex Berenson writes, serious question. At which point do the New York Times and the Washington Post, etc., care or even notice how much better the Sunbelt states, which did not lock down as their cases rose, have done than the Northeast states, which did? Or are they just going to pretend forever? Well, apparently they are going to pretend forever. Let's see. He responds to someone called Kevin Cruz, who said, pretty sure the Times didn't proclaim it was like a horror movie as much as it quoted someone else who said that. Who wants to tell him this little trick used to belong exclusively to tabloids, but these days is used by such paragons of journalistic virtue as ProPublica? Even as their name tells you how great they are the home of all the hospitals are full. Hey, they didn't say it. Yes. The New York Times found a rural hospital in a tiny and desperately poor county on the U.S.-Mexico border, a hospital with no intensive care beds, and proceeds to proclaim that the COVID outbreak is like a horror movie. I don't know. There's an old English expression, cheer up, it might not happen. But I suppose we're all enjoined to believe the opposite now. Andrew Cuomo, Governor Death, or the Love Gov, dishing it out 24/7 as he likes to style himself. I see he's at odds with his own health department over the total number of New York COVID-19 deaths. Now, you see, it's Trump's fault, apparently, all these people died. And look at the disaster. You mean the disaster in, say, New York, compared to Georgia? But of course, it's not his fault. The governor on Wednesday reported 25,179 COVID-related fatalities in New York State, but the state health department issued an emergency rule on Wednesday that said more than 32,000 New Yorkers died from the killer bug. The higher figure would boost the COVID-19 death count in the Empire State by 28%. The health department cited the higher death count in an official government publication, the New York State Register. Cuomo cited the lower 25,000 figure in a press release, as did the department's emergency rule is in line with the almost 33,000 COVID-19 deaths in New York State reported by the Johns Hopkins University's Coronavirus Resource Center. The health department in a statement said there is no dispute with the governor over coronavirus deaths. There's no undercounting. That's ridiculous. 25,179 is the number of confirmed COVID-19 positive deaths, and it's updated between confirmed and presumed. You see, Cuomo has walked into a trap here. He was pushing the number of deaths. That's got to be because the rule which I insisted on is making me look bad. It's kind of making me look like a killer. The very opposite of the statistic is, and both these stories have been from the New York Post. New York City recorded 3 straight days without any new coronavirus deaths on Tuesday, with only 2 virus-related deaths in the 5 boroughs tracked Wednesday. There were 4 new coronavirus deaths in total statewide, according to Cuomo Wednesday. 4 deaths in the state of New York. Well, you can see why they're still on a crisis footing there. And, well, actually, very much the absence of hard work for those people who are not working because they continue to go down. But we learn from this crisis that nobody is safe until everybody is safe. People go up and drag them from the place of work and put them in a place where they can be kept calm and sedated. To say that it's through the world and panicked at all times, I certainly hope not. No better on desktop, KMG many days later. That's for certain. I should be out of here by the middle of next week, which I guess is about in a week's time. Okay. All right. Oh, your connection is unstable. Please wait while we try reconnecting. Okay, well, I'm getting 2. I have very few tabs open, by the way. I'm trying to keep my system usage to an absolute minimum. Not that it seems to be doing much good. So let's talk about The Anonymous Professor Who Wasn't, by Jonah Engel Bromwich and Ezra Marcus. An anonymous anthropology professor remained outspoken about fairness in academia, even as she suffered for months with coronavirus. This person was a scientist who got COVID because they'd been forced to teach. Really? Shouldn't they have done this story right from the beginning then? Said Michael Eisen, a fly geneticist at the University of California, Berkeley, who had interacted on Twitter with the professor for years. It wasn't the first person I knew who got COVID, but for a lot of people, it was one of the first people they knew who got it. If that's the case, then I guess this isn't a very serious disease to people who aren't over the age of 70 or 80. Typical flu epidemic, one tends to know lots of people who got it. You know, whole offices get sick, that sort of thing. Eisen said that he had continued to exchange messages with the person running the account through June, and that this person frequently discussed a difficult recovery. Then Beth Ann McLaughlin, another connection, announced on July 31st that the anonymous professor had died from complications of the virus. Just a few days later, both the account of the anonymous professor and of Ms. McLaughlin were suspended for Twitter policies that, among other things, bar the coordination of fake accounts. Same day, Gerardo Gonzalez, a spokesman for Arizona State University, where the anonymous Twitter user was supposedly professor, described the anonymous account as a hoax. I wonder how long it's going to be before the word hoax is considered to be hate speech, because as we've learned, it's not the facts that are important, it's the pain, it's the anguish. The account had posted inaccurate information about the school, he said. We also had no one, such as a family member or friend, reported death to anyone at the university, he added. Among scientists and academics, the shock of mourning was already laced with suspicion. Enough of them had unpleasant interactions with the combative account and were troubled by its inconsistencies and seeming about turns. You have these eternal alarms that are like, "Oh, I don't trust you," said Julie Libarkin, the head of the Geocognition Research Laboratory at Michigan State. Kind of the same as when I work with Beth Ann. On Tuesday, McLaughlin gave a statement to the New York Times through her lawyer. "I take full responsibility for my involvement in creating the sciencing_by Twitter account." That's kind of a red flag, isn't it? Oh, I see. This is bisexual science, which is better than the normal kind because my actions are inexcusable. I apologize without reservation to all the people I hurt. The anonymous account, Sciencing By, was an active participant in the Corner of Science Twitter that frequently discusses issues of sexual misconduct in the sciences. It claimed on at least one occasion to have grown up in Alabama, to have fled the South because of their oppression of queer folk, and to have attended Catholic school. The account began to pointedly make references to being Native American, and earlier this year began to identify as Hopi. Oh, there's a lot of Hopi Indians in Alabama? I shouldn't think so. Since 2016, it has posted most often about issues around social justice in the sciences with a focus on activism and research about sexual harassment. It was also active in the career of McLaughlin, a neuroscientist. It was key in promoting a permission that called for McLaughlin to be given tenure at Vanderbilt University. She was not given tenure in 2017, a decision she said was influenced by her having testified against a former Vanderbilt professor accused of sexual harassment. Her effort to reverse that decision was unsuccessful in 2019, and she left the university that summer. On one occasion, the account responded to someone asking McLaughlin for information about Vanderbilt with extensive details about the university's salary structure. In April, at Sciencing By began to undergo a drama that belonged solely to her, announcing the coronavirus diagnosis in a tweet. It was Ms. McLaughlin who announced that the anonymous professor had died. "I was pretty shocked," said Erica Smith, a postdoctoral researcher at Indiana University. "I never had particularly great experiences with Sciencing By, but I thought that she was a whole, real human who had just died. I was surprised by how hard it hit me. I ate a pint of ice cream about it." I did not make that last sentence up. This is Erica Smith, a postdoctoral researcher in Indiana University, who is attempting to explain to the world, through the columns of the New York Times, how devastated she was that a anonymous person that she did not know was claimed to be dead, and she said, "I ate a pint of ice cream about it." McLaughlin came across as particularly distraught. She mourned a Sciencing By in a long thread, paying testament to her humanity and toughness. "She was supposed to get a Hopi talisman for health as gifts for us, but she ran out," McLaughlin tweeted. God, the irony of running out of health talisman. Again, that is an actual sentence from a scientist in the New York Times. She also said that she and the person behind the account had been planning on getting matching tattoos in the Hopi language. Ms. McLaughlin has prompted further frustration and disgust by posing as a Hopi woman right as the coronavirus has caused disproportionate harm to indigenous communities in the United States. "There are millions who want to be us," said Jacqueline Keeler, a writer and editor of Pollen Nation, a native-led magazine. That is simply not true. These people are centering themselves in our issues. They are heading Native American departments. They are telling Native students what they can and can't study just to protect their own position. We are being constantly replaced by frauds, white people or other people of different backgrounds pretending to be us. Oh, so I guess you couldn't have a professor, say, of the Italian language or Italian studies who wasn't Italian along those lines? Oh, so I guess what that would mean would be that, say, black people, the whole corpus of European civilization is pretty much off limits to them academically. The first time Eisen had heard from the account was in defense of McLaughlin. The fact that Science By was saying all these things about Beth Ann, saying that Beth Ann had helped her, it didn't make me trust Beth Ann. but it made me less willing to publicly criticize her because I thought that public criticism would be felt by the people she was helping, who turned out to be fake. Melissa Bates, a professor at the University of Iowa, was among those invited to his Zoom memorial via a Twitter thread. Bates said on Twitter that when she showed up on the Zoom, it was just her, McLaughlin, Eisen, and another man. Afterward, Eisen began to search for any evidence that sentencing Bai had been a real person. He couldn't find any. The combination of the weird things that were happening on the call and looking at the tweets and seeing how much they circled Beth Ann, it just became obvious to me. Oh, this is Beth Ann. Took you a while. McLaughlin first began to make waves among those concerned about sexual harassment in the sciences in May 2018. She wrote and circulated a petition that month calling for the National Academy of Sciences to revoke the membership of those who had been punished for sexual harassment, retaliation, and assault. In June 2018, she and Libarkin started a website, Me Too STEM, which quickly garnered attention as women posted a series of largely anonymous stories about being harassed while working in science, technology, engineering, and math. And did that harassment, was it constituted by some nerdy guy asking you if you wanted to have coffee or talking to you in the elevator? I rather suspect it did in many cases. In the same month, McLaughlin further raised her profile when she used Twitter to successfully pressure the website RateMyProfessor.com to drop its system of chili peppers used to rank the hotness of academics. In October 2018, McLaughlin, who had begun to make decisions for the organization without informing her colleagues, created a fundraiser for Me Too STEM on GoFundMe. It eventually raised more than $79,000. McLaughlin's colleagues at Me Too STEM were already feeling uncomfortable with her leadership at that point and were made particularly uneasy by GoFundMe. We were about to get in front of a crowd of people and say, "Give us your money," said Smith. She didn't know how the money would be used, but we do remember thinking we're too broke to participate in white-collar crime. Former colleagues of McLaughlin at Me Too STEM said they did not know where that money ultimately went. A 2019 report from Me Too STEM said that the money, along with other donations, had provided free services for 18 months to over 500 clients. In November 2018, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Media Lab, well, why does MIT have a media lab, awarded its Disobedience Award to McLaughlin. Tarana Burke, a founder of the Me Too movement, and Sherry Martz, who left academia after being harassed by a colleague in her graduate lab. The award recognizes ethical, nonviolent acts of disobedience and comes with $250,000, which that year was split among the three recipients. McLaughlin received more public recognition, and her colleagues at Me Too STEM began to leave the organization, accusing her of frequent verbal abuse and citing the dysfunction plaguing the organization. This is true of all such organizations. It always is. By May 2019, 7 members had resigned, according to a report in BuzzFeed. Deanna Arsala recently received a doctorate from the University of Illinois in Chicago and is one of the few women of color at Me Too STEM. She said that Sciencing Bai had claimed to know details about leadership meetings that included only Beth Ann and a few other people. I remember thinking, is this Beth Ann? You are very quick on the update, Dr. Arsala, who left the organization in part because she and another colleague, also a woman of color, felt that, well, come on, well, why do I have to deal with these euphemisms? Is she black or not? I suspect she's not black because if she were, they would call her black. Catherine Clancy, an anthropology professor at the University of Illinois, who was also involved in the Me Too STEM movement and who is white, boo, said that even as McLaughlin's leadership issues brought bad publicity, her issues with race have gone largely overlooked. Even as women of color inside and outside the organization had tried to get others to see them. Intersectionality, don't you just love it? More, please. Let's see, Dr. Mark Feldman is a psychiatrist who studies factitious disorders in which a person acts as if they or a loved one have a disease. He specializes in what he calls Munchausen by internet, in which such deceptions take place online, and he hears about a new case every couple of weeks. In her statement, McLaughlin said, as I've reflected on my actions the last few days, it's become clear to me that I need mental health treatment. It would appear that a great many people in American academia need mental health treatment, or I don't know, perhaps some basic guidance as to how to discern the real from the fake. And oh, in more female brain going insane stories. Let's see here. Let's go back to that. And a study at. Oh no, let's talk about Tomi Lahren first. Jordan Lancaster tweeted, "Tomi Lahren going full men are trash is not what I was expecting to see today." Yes, I listened to her tweet, and apparently men have been a disappointment to her over and over and over again, not just in Texas, but in other states in the lower 48. And, you know, I guess women like Tomi never ask the question, what is the commonality in all of these cases? So, this woman, this conservative thought, she stands for limited government. Yeah, limited government. And of course, the government of the United States has insinuated itself into every aspect of human life for decades, but these people with a straight face actually talk about limited government. Oh, she also supports, she cannot possibly support government restrictions on abortion, which led to a big feud between her and Glenn Beck, who she used to work for. She now hosts a talk show on Fox Nation called First Thoughts. She does not consider herself a feminist, as she believes in women's empowerment and looks up to various women from both the political left and political right. And I believe that she calls herself a constitutional conservative. And again, oh yes, she's a constitutional conservative, which means what? Which means when the Chief Justice of the United States of America can invent a taxing power for Congress that Congress did not know about for what, 225 years or so, it's clear that the Constitution stands for little and or nothing. That apparently churches can be shut down, according once again to John Roberts, because public health experts are upset. They're worried. Yeah, so much for the Bill of Rights. And interesting story on VDARE, which raises the question about female brain gone insane. Are left-wing women crazy? Did they go crazy because they're left-wing, or vice versa? Lance Welton writes, leftist women seem to be emerging as the new church ladies. In an extraordinary expose, American conservative columnist Rod Dreher recently reported that even Democrat operatives worry privately that hard left women incensed by Hillary Clinton's defeat have completely taken over the middle management of the party and are allowing their rage to guide them. For example, forcing the firing of a young data analyst, David Shore, simply for reporting evidence that the Martin Luther King riots damaged Democrats in the 1968 election. If you watched any of the coverage of the BLM riots, you will be struck by one unavoidable question: why are participants women, especially young women? I reported a while ago on the evidence that more than 50% of young, extremely liberal females have been diagnosed with depression. There is also evidence that females are far more socially conformist than males. But according to a new study published by the National Policy Institute, these are but two of a whole host of factors which help to explain why such a large percentage of BLM protesters are young women. The study, entitled The Next Great Awakening and researched by independent academic Edward Dutton, argues that BLM should be understood as a kind of religious revival. It notes that it has all of these central components of traditional Christianity: dogmas, group orientation, despising the outgroup, even over-detecting agency, evil racists, though, rather than God's presence, everything except metaphysical belief. According to Dutton, religiousness, which is significantly genetic, became selected for partly because it reduced stress in the face of mortality salience, the realization that you might die. Charting 20th century British history, the author shows that the periods of elevated mortality salience, such as wars or the possibility of destitution, are always followed by religious revivals in which people became intensely devout and have overwhelming religious experiences, which reduce their feelings of stress. Dutton presents evidence indicating that the kind of people who have such religious experiences or go through phases of extreme religiosity tend to be high in neuroticism, that is, mental instability, intense negative feelings, and thus prone to depression and anxiety. In such people, these feelings are pushed to such extremes that they become profoundly religious, an adaptive trait to calm the person down. Yes, and then it goes into a whole bunch of Darwinianism, which I'm not going to repeat because I don't believe in Darwinianism. Dutton says multiculturalism is the new religion, the new morality, and thus females would be evolved to want to signal the extent of their adherence to it, being ultimately psychologically adapted to polygamous societies in which they must compete for the highest status males by strongly signaling their religiosity and sexual faithfulness. But are they going to get the highest status males by shaving all their hair off, by getting tattoos all over their body, by gaining 40 pounds, by letting the whole world know that they're insane? They may be getting, I suppose, the highest status males among it. Overall, the woke higher status males do not rank very high in a general survey of high status males. And, okay, so women embittered by Hillary's defeat run the Democratic Party is to claim, so then it should not be surprising, again, according to VDare, that the 2020 Democratic platform on whites and whiteness, they hate you, they really hate you. Audacious Epigony writes, it does not look upon them favorably, accepting the proper noun White House and an instance in reference to the Ryan White Fund. The following excerpts exhaustively contextualize contemporary official Democrat doctrine on whites and whiteness. We will give hate no safe harbor. We will never amplify. How about just repeat or legitimize the voices of bigotry, racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or white supremacy? Democrats will protect and promote the equal rights of all our citizens, women, alphabet people, religious minorities, people with disabilities, Native Americans, and all who have been discriminated against in too many ways and for too many generations. Again, let's pretend that the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. didn't happen. Let's pretend that affirmative action, both official and unofficial, does not exist. Let's pretend that for many years, people have been getting jobs as policemen and firefighters to which they are not properly entitled to, because the Department of Justice has held that testing for these positions results in disproportionate results, i.e. not enough BIPOC people getting government jobs. But let's just pretend that all of that doesn't exist. Oh, let's see. President Trump's words and actions have given safe harbor and encouragement to bigots, anti-Semites, Islamophobes, and white supremacists. You notice how they just throw the anti-Semites in there. Trump is arguably the most pro-Israel president since what? Richard Nixon, who threatened a nuclear war with the Soviet Union during the Yom Kippur War of 1973. And again, Audacious Epigony asks, has there ever been a more pro-Jewish president than Donald Trump? My impression is that anti-Semites despise him, and I've seen that a lot. Wignats go absolutely furious on this basis, that Trump is a traitor as far as they see, because he's simply too friendly to the Jews and too friendly to the state of Israel. And it is a common complaint against woke women that they are tired, they're exhausted, they're just so exhausted, just the work, the emotional labor which they're forced to perform. And one of these sad women is no less than America's most admired woman, Michelle Obama. This is from Pam Key at Breitbart. Wednesday, on her new podcast, former First Lady Michelle Obama said she is dealing with some form of low-grade depression because of the quarantine, racial strife, and seeing this administration, watching the hypocrisy of it day in and day out. I'm waking up in the middle of the night because I'm worrying about something or there's a heaviness. I try to make sure I get a workout in, although there have been periods throughout this quarantine where I've just felt too low. You know, I've gone through some emotional highs and lows that I think everybody feels, where you just don't feel yourself. And sometimes there's been a week or so where I had to surrender to that and not be so hard on myself, practice self-care, in other words, and say, you know what, you're just not feeling that treadmill right now. It is unusual, and it is, it's a direct result of just being out of body, out of mind. And spiritually, these are not fulfilling times spiritually. So I know that I'm dealing with some form of low-grade depression, not just because of the quarantine, but because of the racial strife and just seeing this administration, watching the hypocrisy of it day in and day out is dispiriting. Later in the podcast, when asked how she deals with depression, Michelle Obama said, "My spirit is lifted when I'm feeling healthy, when I'm surrounded by good people. I reach out to my family and to my friends, even in this time of quarantine. I've fought to continue to find a way to stay connected to the people in my life who bring me joy, and my girlfriends, my husbands, my kids. It's the small things. Your husbands and your kids, they're the small things in your life. It's the small rituals. For me, there is no magic to it, but it is effort, because you have to recognize that you're in a place, a bad place, in order to get out of it. So you kind of have to sit in it for a moment to know, uh-oh, I'm feeling off. So now I gotta feed myself with something better." Michelle Obama is one of the most privileged women in the world. She has become really quite rich since leaving office. She is admired by tens of millions, even though she has absolutely no accomplishments in her life. Perhaps that's what is depressing her. That she has power without responsibility, which, as Kipling famously said, has been the prerogative of the harlot through the ages. But let's all feel sorry, so very sorry, for Michelle Obama. Sometimes she doesn't even get her gym time in. She doesn't even get her gym time in. That's how much she is suffering. And from the New York Times, Natalie O'Neill, a Florida activist, or just creep, wearing a face mask with a vulgar anti-cop slogan on it, claims she was kicked off an American Airlines flight because of her race. "I think I got taken off the plane because I'm black," Arlinda Johns said. "My mask said F12. I have no idea what that could possibly mean. And my shirt said Black Lives Matter." Johns had just boarded the flight in Miami last week, where a crew member asked her to cover up the slogan, which is slang for F the police, the outlet reported. Johns said she replaced it with a different mask. She has multiple politically themed masks on her. But then had another tense conversation with the flight attendant. She came back and stood over me. Ooh, how very much like a slave master. And said, "I better not see that other mask." I said, "Leave me alone, lady." She stood there. She said, "Okay, I got you." The airplane, which had pulled away from the gate for takeoff, then suddenly did a U-turn, and Johns was escorted off of it, she said. A spokesman for the airline told the outlet Johns was removed for using offensive language. Crew member instructions are to remove or not allowed to cover a face mask with offensive language. Offensive clothing is not allowed on flights. Johns, a local activist who believes in abolishing the police, there's a shocker, said she was targeted for her race and outspoken political views. Ultimately, she had to drive hundreds of miles to her destination in Illinois, she said. "This is what American Airlines is doing, and this is what had happened to me," she fumed. Well, I guess we can all take a moment out of our days to feel very, very sorry, very, very sorry for this unfortunate woman. Let's talk about QAnon and the New York Times. The show is very New York Times heavy. I felt that I'd been neglecting that newspaper, and it is simply a treasure trove of idiocy and planted axioms. It's a story yesterday by Charlie Warzel, described as opinion writer at large. Conspiracy theory of the 21st century. That is to say, is QAnon the most dangerous conspiracy theory of the 21st century? Quote, it's a collaborative fiction built on wild speculation that hardens into reality. This story is a little more balanced than I thought it might be, but it doesn't really go into much detail as to what QAnon actually says. What are its conspiracy theories? I'm always suspicious of stories such as this. Oh, these are bad people. These are perhaps crazy people. These are people who are dangerous, etc., etc. Well, how are they dangerous? No, we can't possibly mention any of their conspiracy theories because that would amplify, as the kids are saying, conspiracy theory. Okay, you want to talk about conspiracy theories? You want to talk about sexual conspiracy theories? In a few weeks, I'm going to be talking about a biography called In Plain Sight by Dan Davis of a man, Sir Jimmy Savile, who died in 2011. I'm going to read from Wikipedia here. He was an English DJ, television and radio personality who hosted BBC shows, including Top of the Pops and Jim'll Fix It. He raised an estimated £40 million for charities and during his lifetime was widely praised for his personal qualities and as a fundraiser. After his death, hundreds of allegations of sexual abuse were made against him, leading the police to conclude that Savile had been a predatory sex offender, possibly one of Britain's most prolific. There had been allegations during his lifetime, but they were dismissed and accusers ignored or disbelieved. Savile took legal action against some accusers. One would only need to see a picture of Jimmy Savile's face to know that he was evil and that he was best avoided and not to be given any positions of responsibility. Yes, let's see. During his lifetime, he was known for fundraising and supporting charities and hospitals, in particular Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Aylesbury, Leeds General Infirmary, and Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire. This man was given control over hospitals and the patients therein. Needless to say, he was not a physician, had no medical training. Now, Jimmy Savile, despite the fact that, as Davis's books make clear, the authorities knew about him for decades, but he had powerful political protection. Well, not merely because he was on the BBC regularly, and he helped people out with Jim'll Fix It, and he raised money for various causes, but he had the patronage of Prince Charles, who was a very close friend of Jimmy Savile, and also of Margaret Thatcher, who was a very close friend. And when I say close friend, I suppose if you invite a man to your country home for Christmas year after year after year, that constitutes a close friend to me. And Margaret Thatcher pushed for year after year for Jimmy Savile to be given a knighthood. The civil servant said, no, 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 no. Okay, finally. Yes, sure. If you want it that badly, we'll give Jimmy Savile a knighthood. I'll be speaking in more detail about Savile's life, but okay, so if these wild sexual accusations, if they are always untrue, then how do you explain Jimmy Savile? I could look at the Midlands in England, where for over 20 years, massive rape and grooming of white teenage girls by, let's say, BIPOC men from Asia was known. It was known by local authorities. It was known by the police. It was known by county authorities. It was known by countrywide authorities, and it was ignored. And people were told to leave it alone because it would be racism to seek an end to this. There have been countless trials and dozens or hundreds of people subsequently sentenced many years after the fact, but it is a fact that this was a sexual scandal that was swept under the rug for close to 20 years for political, for racial reasons. So again, it's a wild conspiracy that there is these terrible things going on in the Midlands, and not just the Midlands, in cities like Oxford and Newcastle. Oh no, but these wild sexual accusations, they must be wrong because by definition, all such accusations are wrong. Well, let's look at Belgium. Marc Dutroux, I'm reading from Wikipedia here, born 1956, is a Belgian convicted child molester and murderer. He was convicted in 1989 for the abduction and rape of 5 young girls with his then wife Michelle Martin and other accomplices. He was released on parole after 3 years in prison. In 1996, he was arrested on suspicion of having kidnapped, tortured, and sexually abused 6 females aged between 8 and 19, 4 of whom died. His widely publicized trial took place in 2004. He was convicted of all charges, including, along with the murder of a suspected former accomplice, and sentenced to life imprisonment. This is a very long and complicated story. Let's put it this way. There is considerable evidence that the government of Belgium had been suborned by a pedophile gang led by Marc Dutroux. A number of shortcomings in the investigation caused widespread discontent in Belgium with the country's criminal justice system, and the ensuing scandal was one of the reasons for the reorganization of Belgium's law enforcement agencies and widespread allegations of corruption and infiltration of the Belgian justice system by a criminal enterprise. In the White March, 300,000 Belgian citizens protested the mishandling of the case. How about large, really now significant numbers of boys under the age of 10, maybe boys under the age of 8, have been persuaded that they are actually girls, and that the medical establishment has gone along with this, and puberty blocking drugs are given to these boys. Surgery is performed on them. Apparently, I'm told now that women becoming men is now there are more cases of this than the other. And there is no evidence that this is efficacious in the treatment of sexual dysphoria, and yet the medical profession has gone along with this. And of course, Big Pharma loves it. But I mean, it would be outrageous to suggest that there was any kind of conspiracy there, right? According to this piece in the New York Times, in 2019, the FBI cited QAnon as one of the most dangerous conspiracy theories posing domestic terrorist threats to the United States, and cited past incitements of violence from its adherents. Despite its fringe origins, the conspiracy movement continues to grow in troubling ways. QAnon supporting candidates are running for office in surprising numbers. The movement has been tacitly embraced by President Trump and his re-election campaign, who've amplified, that word again, QAnon accounts and even some of their memes. Oh, let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Where did Jeffrey Epstein get his money from? How did he become so wealthy? Nobody seems to know. What, he was a failed private school teacher? How did he get all these powerful friends? How is it that the governments were convinced to come to an illegal plea bargain with him? How is it that when he was released from jail, all of these socialites, including George Stephanopoulos, said, "Welcome back, Jeffrey. Yeah, it's good to see you out of the clink. We're not going to raise any uncomfortable questions about your conduct because, that would be rude, and not rude people." How is it that Jeffrey Epstein manages to get quite close to, I don't know, Bill Clinton, amongst other people? But no, we don't want to. How is it that he died so mysteriously in prison? This was the most infamous prisoner in the United States penal system, and how long does he last in prison? What, a week? Oh, he committed suicide, apparently, after we had been Told? No, it wouldn't be possible for him to commit suicide in prison. It's just that prison cells are constructed in such a way that no, it couldn't be done. And yet he died. For those who haven't paid attention to the community since the early days, the movement's growing popularity is alarming and often confusing. Some have compared it to a budding religion. There's a lot of budding religions about these days. Personally, the phenomenon has always struck me as a dark iteration of vigilante investigations that grew popular on message boards in the 2010s. Citizen journalism gone wrong. Well, I guess all citizen journalism is wrong, according to the New York Times, because the New York Times is not in charge of it. Perhaps the best explanation I've heard for the movement's popularity comes from Adrian Hahn, the chief executive of the gaming company Six to Start and designer of alternate reality games, or ARGs. Unlike video games, alternate reality games aren't played on a console. They use the world as their storytelling platform. There's no one particular medium. The story takes place in real time and seems to exist in the world. So game designers hide clues and puzzles in websites, apps, and even newspaper advertisements. It's a bit like a network treasure hunt that turns the world around you into a game. Well, there's a problem with this metaphor because, of course, I've described several infamous conspiracies, and of course, I didn't even mention the invasion of Iraq in 2003. What can we learn from the movement's rise? Well, alternate reality games incorporate the internet and website's real-world interactions. I saw the parallel with QAnon for two reasons. QAnon is a uniquely 21st century conspiracy theory. There have been others, but QAnon was born on forums like 4chan and 8chan, and the way that people interact with it initially is so purely online. But the effects bleed into the real world, much like an alternate reality game. But specifically, what caught my eye is that almost everyone who discovers QAnon uses a phrase like, "I did my research." I kept hearing that, and I couldn't get it out of my head. This research is basically typing things into Google, but when they go down the rabbit hole, unlike scholars who never go down rabbit holes. They open a fascinating fantasy world of secret wars and cabals and Hillary Clinton controlling things, well, like the Democratic National Committee, screwing Bernie Sanders out of the nomination in 2016. But that's a conspiracy theory. And that strange thing that happened this year, where who won the Iowa caucus? We don't know. It's a mystery. How many thousands of votes we're talking about here? Not very many, but you never really came to an official proclamation of who won that. Of course, it very much hurt Bernie Sanders, but that's just a coincidence. QAnon offers convenient explanations for things that feel inexplicable or wrong about the world. It reminded me specifically of how people get to alternate reality games through these research rabbit holes. Okay, I was talking earlier this week about this infamous piece in The Lancet with hydroxychloroquine. And The Lancet is, or was, one of the most highly respected medical journals in the world. And they published a piece damning hydroxychloroquine as useless and dangerous. And it turns out this study was completely bogus. Completely bogus. And The Lancet pulled it and apologized. As William Briggs asked, how did this get published? Who thought that this was a good idea, and why? Could it be that Big Pharma does not want hydroxychloroquine to be used in the treatment of COVID-19, and they would prefer expensive vaccines to be used instead? I'm not making that claim. But how was this fraud exposed? Nerds on the internet picked through this, and they discovered that it was obviously a tissue of lies. But yes, they did their research, unlike, say, the so-called scientists who published that piece in The Lancet. Now, I am not going to, I don't hold any brief for QAnon. I'm just saying that it beggars belief that after all of the falsehood, particularly with regard to COVID-19 that is being shoved down our throat, that the New York Times can be so haughty about QAnon. The story does point out that QAnon is popular because of a collapse of confidence in our institutions. However, Mr. Hahn says, oh, it is a good thing that Twitter is trying to ban accounts and viral conversations about QAnon. It helps reduce the spread. But the reason this is so dangerous is that the little rabbit holes that take you deeper into QAnon are everywhere. A YouTube video might lead you to a Wikipedia page that takes you to another video. Oh no. Each one is maybe harmless, but the combined effect might draw you into the world. How about we look at Black Lives Matter through that lens? How about if we look at critical race theory through this same lens? We could come to exactly the same conclusions, and these conclusions would be better founded. Because, oh, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Well, wait a minute, I thought that was a extreme group associated with the murder of policemen, founded by 3 women. 2 of them are lesbian, call themselves Marxists, trained Marxists. Oh, no, 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 we're all on board with Black Lives Matter, just like we're all on board with Juneteenth and International Patient Day. No one's heard of that. Everyone's heard of that. No, 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 no. We are not being hoodwinked. How dare you suggest that anyone is being hoodwinked? And, okay, let's see whether anyone can hear this show. Let's go to the chat. Can only post links if you have a wrench, said Manfred von Thistlebaum. Listen to Luke. Oswald acted alone. I read Joe Posner's book, and I believe that Oswald did act alone. Isn't systemic racism a wild conspiracy theory, says Justin Proto? Yes, it is. Because it is unfalsifiable, as Karl Popper would say. Okay, here's the evidence. Oh, well, that's white evidence using white arithmetic and white mathematics, etc., 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 you know. And you can just discount empirical evidence by saying that empirical evidence does not account for feelings. And no, it does not account for feelings. That it's, you know, to use a phrase Kingsley Amis says, it's like arguing with communists. It can't be done. I mean, I learned some time ago that there was no point whatsoever in engaging with Black Twitter unless you were in it for the yucks. Because essentially you will have the same slogan thrown at you over and over again. No justice, no peace. Okay, I know what those words mean, but why do you keep repeating this phrase as if it's a QED? Whose idea of justice, by the way? Well, obviously your idea of justice, not my idea of justice, but I'm disqualified from taking part in this, what's called a conversation, well, because of my skin color. Mr. Dissident says, if there's systemic racism, it would be overwhelmingly against non-cosmopolitan whites. Well, yes, and it is. It is. Shadow banning of my comments on YT, says Mr. Dissident. I don't know anything about that. Contra Coup says the media is more invested in Donald Trump's tax returns than Jeffrey Epstein's island buying funny money. It's truly amazing. Yes, it is truly amazing. Again, we know that Jeffrey Epstein had some sort of connection to a man called or Leslie Wexner. What exactly was that connection? Supposedly Wexner gave this fabulous property in Manhattan to Jeffrey Epstein. Why would he do that? It doesn't make a lot of sense at all. How does Jeffrey Epstein get to be pals with Prince Andrew and, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell? Well, you know, her father, I've talked about his funeral, the extraordinary funeral in Israel. Obviously, Israel's elite thought that Robert Maxwell had done things for him. And this wasn't a question of him being an advocate for Zionism, not being a campaigner against anti-Semitism or anything like that. No, clearly they meant something more concrete than that. But I suppose that's just a coincidence and we shouldn't be talking about it. KMG, why am I censored, says Jim Bowden. I am not censoring anybody. No, I have not censored anyone on this stream. My Trail of Disgrace says, have you read Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin, a book about the grooming gang scandal? I will. I'll get a hold of that. And I'm just writing that down right now. Chogokin666, British police are below contempt. Well, you may have seen that police are being routinely attacked on the streets of Britain now, and people just look on. A lot of them are to things that many said about the late Richard Jewell prior to his ultimate vindication. Now, what I'm saying about Jimmy Savile is that you just have to look at him to see that he was obviously mad. He was obviously deranged. And I don't mean, in a Joe Biden sense of who am I, where am I, what am I doing here, where did everybody go? I mean, in the sense that I have seen, I can't think of a better example than what you might call the face of evil. Let's see, William Hicks says, Kevin, whatever you don't mock any of the rapper gangs of Chicago. They're pretty sensitive. FBG Duck got whacked for dissing his rivals. Someone was complaining about that on Twitter. Some guy named Duck died, and we're all in mourning. Nobody had heard about this fellow until today. Mike, friends with Gary Glitter. Well, Gary Glitter, he fled to the Orient, where he was eventually hunted down. It would appear that Gary Glitter, I believe his name was Paul Raven originally, he had a number of hits in Britain in the 1970s, but he didn't seem to have any political connections. Jimmy Savile was savvy enough right from the very beginning to become friends with the police, to become very close friends with the police. And in Davis's book, there are several police officers quoted saying, yeah, everybody knew about him, but we were told that he was untouchable. And why would that be the case? Why would that be the case? Brandon Smith says, if the BLM money trail heads back to the CCP, would it surprise anyone? Soft power abroad is their favorite. Well, conspiracies, revolutions, and the media has never taken standing, pervasive existence of a real-life Bond villain in our midst. I'm going to bring down the Bank of England. Yeah, he did. I'm going to force Britain out of the ERM. And he did. I'm going to overthrow the government of Georgia or whatever. And he did. It's like, no, let's not ask too many questions about George Soros. No, let's not do that. Aren't these people supposed to be against the concentration of wealth? They used to carry on against the gnomes of Zurich, as they called them, back in innocent days. But there are conservatives on the staff of the New York Times, and one of them is called Brett Stevens. And I guess Brett was having a fallow period because his opinion piece for today is called Why Edmund Burke Still Matters. Yes, Edmund Burke. Let's pretend that the world is comparable to the way that it was, let's say, in 18th century Britain. Let's see, he writes, had it not been for the revolution in France, Edmund Burke would likely have been remembered a bit vaguely as an 18th century philosopher-statesman of extravagant rhetorical gifts but frustratingly ambivalent views. The Irish-born member of the British Parliament was sympathetic to the grievances of the American colonies, but not, like his one-time friend Thomas Paine, an enthusiastic champion of their independence and acerbic critic of George III, but a firm defender of monarchy, a staunch opponent of English rapacity in India, but a supporter of British Empire, an advocate for the gradual emancipation of at least some slaves, but no believer in equality. He was also an unabashed snob. Yes, as only an Irishman from a rather lowly position could be. The occupation of a hairdresser, he wrote, cannot be a matter of honor to any person. Burke's name endures because of his uncompromising opposition to the French Revolution, a view he laid out as some of Britain's more liberal thinkers thought it represented humanity's best hopes. Reflections on the Revolution in France was published in November 1790, more than a year after the fall of the Bastille, but before the Reign of Terror, when it still seemed possible that Louis XVI would survive as a constitutional monarch and the country wouldn't descend into a bloodbath. Burke foresaw more accurately than most of his great contemporaries what the revolution would bring. Okay, well, there's a revolution going on in America right now, and Donald Trump's on the other side of that revolution, but Bret Stephens does not like Donald Trump. He does not like Donald Trump at all. And yeah, apparently one of the major reasons is that Donald Trump is crude. Oh, oh, really? Unlike, say, LBJ, who may still be a great hero of the left because of his activities on behalf of the civil rights agenda. Kennedy failed to pass this legislation, but LBJ did. LBJ was an astonishingly crude man. Can you imagine sitting on the toilet with the door open and calling in aides to have discussions? Can you imagine doing that? LBJ did that regularly, and he did it on purpose to humiliate people who'd gone to Ivy League schools. LBJ was fond of showing off abdominal scars, that sort of thing. How about Bill Clinton? Bill Clinton, boxers or briefs? Bill Clinton playing the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show. Bill Clinton saying things like, "Eatin' ain't cheatin'." Just an astonishingly crude and vulgar man. But apparently, until Trump, there were no crude or vulgar men that became president of the United States. Of course, Edmund Burke was not a conservative. He was a Whig and not a Tory. Stephens writes, the usual caricature of Burke is that he's the conservative's conservative. Well, you just don't know very much about 18th century British politics. Not even close. Consider what Burke might have made of Trump and Trumpism. He would have been bemused by the phrase, drain the swamp. To take the metaphor seriously, one would end up destroying all the life within the swamp, leaving only mud. Yes, and swamps spread disease, you fatuous twit. He would have been revolted by the Trump family's self-dealing. Can we have some evidence of that? Among the great causes of Burke's life was his role in the impeachment of Warren Hastings, the de facto Governor General of India, for corrupt and cruel administration. Trump wants to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the deep state, which makes money, many billions of dollars, essentially killing people, hapless people for the most part there. They don't want these wars to end. So who's more on the side of Burke there? The neocons or the anti-neocons? Above all, Burke would have been disgusted by Trump's manners. Manners are of more importance than laws, he wrote. The law touches us but there and now and then. Manners are what vex and soothe, corrupt or purify, exalt or debase, barbarize or refuse. They give their whole form and color to our lives. According to the quality, they aid morals. They supply them or they totally destroy them. Unquote. Burke's understanding of the centrality of manners to norms, of norms to morals, of morals to culture, and of culture to the health of the political order means that he would have been unimpressed by claims that Trump had scored policy wins, like appointing conservative judges or cutting the corporate tax rate. Those would have been baubles floating in befouled waters. When one considers how dirty and corrupt British politics was in Edmund Burke's time, with the existence of rotten boroughs, yes, this is just fatuous, absolute fatuous. Trump's real legacy in Burke's eyes would have been his relentless debasement of political culture, of personal propriety, of respect for institutions, of care for tradition, of trust between citizens and civil authority, of a society that believes and has reason to believe in its own essential decency. To make us love our country, he wrote, our country ought to be lovely. One wonders whether Stephens is just a fool or whether he is a liar. A lovely country, essential decency. One wonders why Stephens isn't afraid of being struck down by a lightning bolt, as he wrote this. I wrote an essay about Burke for America's Future Foundation some years ago. Here's a quotation Yes, I was arguing against a piece in Reason talking about 35 heroes of freedom. And yes, was it Nick Gillespie had written, "For all its many problems, the world we live is dizzying in its variety, breathtaking in its riches, and wide-ranging in its options. Malcontents on the right and left who diagnose modernity as suffering from affluenza or options anxiety will admit this much. These days, we've even got a greater choice of ways to be unhappy, which may be as close to a definition of utopia as we're likely to come." I commented, "One would have thought it obvious that a greater choice of ways to be unhappy is a powerful argument against license. Certainly Burke thought so. Burke is considered the father of modern conservatism, but he was a Whig, not a Tory, the champion of the American colonists and the people of India against the depredations of Warren Hastings, a classical liberal, in other words." But this is what he had to say. "Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their appetites, in proportion as they are more disposed to listen to the counsels of the wise and good in preference to the flattery of knaves. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere, and the less of it there is within, the more it must be without. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters." And it's funny, it's as if the culture war had never happened, according to Bret Stephens. It's as if everything that we believed to be true, or at least to be decent, was not discarded. For Donald Trump to be considered, other than in the context of his time, is absolutely absurd. What Stephens is simply arguing that, oh yes, let's go back to Conservatism Inc., where we care so very much about the common people that we despise, that we sell out to the Chamber of Commerce and the like, as we await our very lucrative positions on K Street after we retire. It's just it's a testament to the bankruptcy of Conservatism Inc. Oh yes, Burke and Tocqueville. Tocqueville and Burke and Tocqueville. You think the world may have changed a little bit since Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America? Maybe just a little bit? Do you think the whole notions of the managerial society and scale that Tocqueville would have any possible, or Burke for that matter, have any possible understanding of those and how they have radically transformed our world? No, but I suppose if you continue to get paid for rabbiting on about Burke and Tocqueville and Burke, then I guess that's what one will do. I learned today that, let me check this out here first. What do we got here? Oh, yes. Jacobin writes, "We shouldn't fetishize mom and pops. They offer lower wages, skimpier benefits, and inferior labor protections." Someone who calls himself the Marquis de Possade comments, "One thing you'll notice with these types is they'll go, yeah, Google and JP Morgan owning the government is bad, I guess, and then spend 500 pages writing about their harrowing ordeal working at Art's Deli that reads like the memoir of a Holocaust survivor." You know, Burke was a big believer in what he called the little platoons, and contemporary Conservatism Inc., they have no interest in little platoons. Bigger is better. Bigger is always better, according to these people. But once again, you should all heed my advice and stop calling yourself conservatives. Stop arguing with conservatives about what constitutes conservatism, because conservatism is dead as the dodo. So I learned from the Daily Beast, why are people so deathly afraid of criticizing Beyonce? There's been a startling lack of mischievous dissenting voices when it comes to Beyonce's visual album, Black is King. Cassie DaCosta finds that troubling. I don't know. She's a good-looking woman. I find her rather bland in every sense, but she has a ferocious cult about her. I suppose one of the reasons why the critics are afraid to criticize Beyonce is because she is a strong black woman. And in 2020, the year of Black Lives Matter, you're not going to want to criticize her. Also, as we learned in the case I was talking about last week, if you attack any of these people, their army of stands will come after you, and there's no quarter from these people. They will threaten you with anything. So I'd rather ask the question, who's afraid of Lena Waithe? I've had a dim understanding of who this woman is for a couple of years. Let's see, according to Wikipedia, born 1984, American screenwriter, producer, and actress. She starred in the Netflix comedy drama series Master of None. She became the first black woman to win the Primetime Emmy Award for outstanding writing in a comedy series in 2017 for writing the show's Thanksgiving episode, which was loosely based on her personal experience of, wait for it, coming out to her mother. How many of these coming out stories do we need, actually? Well, I guess we're going to get thousands upon thousands of them. How come so many of the black elite in the United States are homosexual now? I'm not saying this is a conspiracy, but it has become so conspicuous that one cannot deny it. She's the creator of the Showtime drama series The Chi, Boomerang, and 20s. She appeared in Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One, and in 2019 wrote and produced the crime film Queen and Slim, which is, let's say, let's call it risible. Okay, it would do much better if it were released today rather than last year, because we're on a crime spree, because we got no choice. Evil white supremacy has forced us into this. Let's see. Waithe in 2017, Waithe and Ansari, Aziz Ansari, they won this Primetime Emmy Award for Thanksgiving. She was the first black American woman to win an Emmy in that category. During her Emmy speech, she sent a special message to her alphabet people family, discussing how the things that make us different, those are our superpowers. She ended her speech by recognizing her journey as a black woman, saying, "Thank you for embracing a little Indian boy from South Carolina and a little queer black girl from the south side of Chicago." Okay. All right. So then I came across this. So I want to talk about Lena Waithe, because I came across this story in the Reporter 2 days ago. And so I'm looking at the big picture at the top of the story, and I thought, they ran the picture, the wrong picture. This is a picture of George Floyd. And then, no, oh my God. Lena Waithe, she looks like a female George Floyd, except that she doesn't look like a female George Floyd. She just looks like George Floyd. There is nothing female about her whatsoever. I mean, it's shocking that a woman this horrifying looking, a woman this ugly, could be at the center of a Hollywood cult. Lena Waithe developing open marriage drama at Amazon. She's preparing another project. The prolific writer-producer has signed a deal with Streamer 2019. Just finished a draft of a pilot script on open relationships, which is now being developed for series. Society has such a conservative way of looking at marriage, says Waithe. No, it does not. Society had a conservative way of looking at marriage, Donald Trump would never have been elected president of the United States, and I could give many such examples. We have serial monogamy now, serial marriage now. We live in a world where people boast about how swinging has helped their marriage, where people boast about threesomes and the like. Yeah, let's pretend that, I don't know, things haven't changed in the last 100 years, say, with regard to marriage. Let's talk about a society in which divorced people found that they suffered social difficulties because they were divorced. But just very, very curious. This woman, Wade, says, I do think that we as a nation need to reevaluate what marriage looks like for us as a country because of whatever we have right now, it ain't working. Oh, so the meaning of marriage has been grossly devalued. So apparently the solution of that is so that it should be even more grossly devalued. Yes, I was led to this Hollywood Reporter story by this curious entry at Crazy Day and Nights. At this point, everything this A-minus list actress, writer, showrunner, producer pitches is just an excuse to live out some kind of sexual fantasy fetish and be paid for it while stalking everyone on the cast like a predator looking for their next meal. One would think that if you were pushing an open marriage concept, basically we're going to reimagine marriage, what you would want would be a character who would be seen as sympathetic. There's all sorts of ways that a character can become sympathetic. The easiest way for a character to be sympathetic to a broad audience is to be attractive. And Lena Waithe is the absolute opposite of that. I mean, I'm trying to figure out now, Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, and Waithe is from Chicago, who is the most terrifying looking? That's the question that I am examining now. But apparently, we learned that this is what we're going to get on television. On network television and on streaming television, we are going to get shows like this one, which is being pushed by Lena Waithe. And of course, television watching, it's like voting. You don't have to do it. And they can't force you to vote for a particular candidate. And they can't force you to watch, to pay for all of the pause coming from Netflix, Amazon, Disney, and the like. I know standards of beauty have changed over the years, but when Lena Waithe is this woman's a sex symbol? No, stop saying that. Metal Mike makes a crude comment about Michelle Obama, which I'm not going to repeat. I get the joke, but this is my good taste show. The Visionary Companion says, why do I get the feeling I would not enjoy the company of people defined by Michelle Obama as good people? Okay, Metal Mike is keeping this up. No, she seems like a very unpleasant person. She was openly mocking her husband during his presidential run in 2012. The supportive wife does not do that. Oh, all this talk about him farting or being unable to make breakfast. What, he couldn't put Eggos in the toaster or whatever? Come off it. And her weird talk about she demanded that her husband do something special for her because of, all of her pressures, which was her going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. I remember reading that story thinking, okay, I know where this was ending. She's saying that she wants to sleep in another half an hour or 45 minutes. No, she wants to drive to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning so she can develop those muscles that are only developed through lifting weights. They cannot be developed through normal human activity. Comments about the gulag. My. Okay, and let's get some final comments here. Kipling's God of the copybook headings may not be relevant today, but the consequences of defaming those gods that Kipling warned us about have come to pass. Well, yes. Yes, that is true. Dawn from Beyond, I can't even mention it to my son and DIL because she has a beloved trans nephew. It is a touchy subject. I suppose that, this is one of the advantages of old age. I was talking about that with regard to William Shatner last week. That, you can pretend to be senile even if you're not. that if someone starts talking about, their trans niece or nephew or whatever, you can just pretend that you didn't hear them, or that no, that's not true. We know that's not true, or pretend you don't know what a transsexual is. I think that would be, and then they explain it to you. You know, I like jokes, and I like it when you make jokes, but sometimes you go too far. Imagine all of those things that you're talking about. Dilation? Oh, no one would go through anything like that. So disgusting. No, 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 no. They wouldn't. It's sweet of you. I appreciate your effort, but no, no, that's not true. Don from Beyond was reading Highlights magazine for toddlers to my 18-month-old grandson today, shocked to see photo of a trans person in there. Wouldn't this be confusing to a baby? Um, hasn't that magazine been around for like 50 years or 100 years or whatever? It seems to me in cases of that, you could just get a hold of old copies. I don't know, I suppose the libraries throw them out, but I mean, I'm sure this is a situation where you could probably buy 100 of them for $5 or whatever from some secondhand dealer. Anyway, that is the show for today. Tomorrow is Theater Thursday, and I am going to be discussing John Boorman's delightful 1974 science fiction film, Zardos. And on the book club on Friday, I am going to be discussing Russell Miller's fine biography of L. Ron Hubbard called Barefaced Messiah. So, thank you all for listening and or viewing, and I apologize again for the visual problems. If you like the show, despite the problems or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you would like to contribute a donation to this show, which would be greatly appreciated at this time, my PayPal account is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And if you're Canadian, you can send money to me directly through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that all of my dear viewers and listeners do manage to form some kind of genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.